This is PowerShell for the Anxious IT Pro, a journey down the rabbit hole. My name is Jason Himmelstein. I am a Technical Strategy Director at Rackspace. I am also an MVP in Office Apps and Services, as well as Data Platform. And I've got a bunch of sessions throughout the week. If you don't get a chance to come chat with me after this, you'll find me all over the place. Please feel free to come up and ask questions. I'm going to take you on a quick journey through what is PowerShell, okay? Here's my agenda. Hopefully this fits. Just so you know, in a 20-minute session, folks, the demo gods just aren't kind enough to us to allow us to do proper demo. So this is a talk track session explaining, and hopefully you'll bear with me on that. So there's not demo in this session. I'm going to cover an introduction. We're going to talk about what it is, what it isn't. We're going to cover why PowerShell, because I get that question quite a bit. Do an introduction around it. Talk about the functional explanations, because that's different than the why and the how as well. We'll talk about do's and do nots, some patterns to avoid, some patterns to do. We'll talk about syntax and bracketology, and then we'll wrap it all up. Sound good? All right. So, changes in the IT Pro world around admin stuff. This happened a number of years ago. PowerShell's been around a while, right? How many people have actually interacted with PowerShell at this point? I hope it's almost everybody in the room. Good. All right. So, the IT Pro world has been changing. The admin world has been changing. It's a cloud-first world, right? It's a cloud world, okay? We've evolved. We've changed. Things are different now. It's no longer click, 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 finish. That was one of my favorites. Deployment methods, right? Click, 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 finish. The only thing better was click, finish. Doesn't work that way anymore. PowerShell is a great way of actually deploying things. Here's also a number of other things that it does, but let's talk about what it is. And in order to talk about what it is, I first want to talk about what it isn't. It is not fire and forget. This is not just go grab some code, run it, and it's done, okay? You must read PowerShell before you run it. You cannot come live with me if you get fired when you run PowerShell that you got off the internet. Get it from my blog? You can't come stay with me. My wife said no, okay? It is your responsibility to know what is in your PowerShell before you run it. It is not a packaged executable. This is not something that's been certified. You find code on the internet, it can do damage. 3 lines of code, I can destroy your entire world, okay? More importantly, you can destroy your whole world because you're the one with admin rights, okay? It is not developer-centric. When I first started looking at PowerShell, I got told, oh, this is for developers. This isn't an IT Pro thing. You just sit in the corner and we'll hand you PowerShell. Never run PowerShell that you haven't read, even from your own developers, especially from your own developers, because you know, all right? It's not too hard for an IT Pro, folks. It's our world. This is where things are going. Whether it's in SharePoint, whether it's in data, 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 whether it's in SharePoint, whether it's in database land, doesn't matter, Power Platform, all of these things now have PowerShell commandlets. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, today they released a bunch of new commandlets for the graph, okay? Whole bunch of new stuff you should go out and check out once you get proficient with it. Sort of like a Swiss Army knife with, and I left it off, a nuclear-powered chainsaw, okay? Really, really useful, but dang, you can do some damage with that thing if you do it wrong, okay? And it is the future of our world as IT pros, okay? trying to find a definition of what is PowerShell, I went to the authoritative source of truth in the world, Wikipedia. This is what Wikipedia has to say about PowerShell, all right? That's a bunch of gobbledygook. Doesn't really mean a whole lot to me, so I try to break it down into my own type of terms. And the clicker, there we go. So it is an object-based, not text-based command line interface for Microsoft technologies. Okay, Jason, what does that mean? Because that's, again, a little bit of gobbledygook. What does it actually mean? It means that the results that you get back in PowerShell, you can take action on. It's not just a text-based string of stuff, okay? You're returning objects. This is good. This can also be bad. For those of you who like to run one window the whole time and don't ever shut things down, you will bloat out the memory of that window. So we'll talk about the shell here in just a minute, but it is returning objects to you that you need to dispose of, okay? K seems to be my go-to word for the day. How about that? So why did Microsoft do PowerShell instead of, going with we'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? We'll cover that off here in just a minute. What can it be used for? I've talked a little bit towards deployment. Configuration's a big piece. Management, administration, and development. Yes, developers use PowerShell. They write code in PowerShell to do all sorts of different things. Let's talk about the basics of PowerShell. There are two things that make up the basics of PowerShell. One is the PowerShell console. For those of us who are command line people, it looks like any other command line interface. Oftentimes it's blue though. It's not always blue, but oftentimes it will show up as a blue shell window. That's a command line interface, right? You also have the ISE, the Integrated Scripting Environment. This is really powerful because we get something called IntelliSense. Developers have been doing that forever, right? It will give you predictability and say, if you start typing get dash, and we'll cover that here in just a minute, I'm not trying to get ahead of myself, it'll make suggestions for you of what you might want to get, what the other things are that are there. Let's talk about terminology. I've already sort of given away the shell. That's the command line window. It's not just, when you type CMD, you get the black box, and everybody's familiar with that. MS-DOS, a couple of us are old enough to remember MS-DOS, right? Okay, we've had command line windows around forever. Linux folks, Starnix folks, we've had command shells forever. Okay, this is not a new concept, it's just more powerful. The commandlets, and I'm going to cover these things off in detail here in a minute. Variables, pipeline, scripts, functions, and modules. So what am I talking about when I start talking about these commandlets? Well, first of all, it's a funny way to spell something, but you'll find it spelled out in the whole word, but more times than not, you'll find it spelled this way. So if you're Google Binging for something out there, go off and search for it this way. You'll oftentimes find it better. It's the main building block of PowerShell. It's many commands that perform a single action, and they're actually against .NET classes. So you're calling things and you're doing actions that are based on .NET classes. Okay, which is why in order to run PowerShell, you do have to have the .NET framework installed. Happens by default in most of the OSs today. The output of one commandlet can be pipelined into future commandlets for use, because you're returning objects. So you're going to be able to do one thing and then pass it on to another thing. You can do an equality test with things like EQ and LT, and cover that here in just a minute in order to do matching and be able to find different things. Different types of modules. There are 4 different types of modules today. These are the main types of modules. You have script modules, binary, manifest, and dynamic. The bottom one is not one that is frequently used. As you're getting started, kind of just ignore that one. This one in the binary section, it's a DLL. It's going to be a packaged set of commandlets that's a module for you that's usually provided by a vendor. The other two here, manifest and script, are oftentimes, the manifest is usually written by developers, and script, well, that's more of an IT pro's land. Okay, it's in this world, it's a PSM1. You can package up your own module. You can do that on the fly. You can do it with any one of these little high-level, top-of-the-wave stuff. Objects. These are instances of classes, and those classes have properties and methods. So objects have properties and methods to them. Well, what does that mean? Well, you get the membership, properties and methods of an object, okay? So that's the members of that object. I'll simplify in just a minute, I promise. Okay? So properties, what is an object, and methods, what you can do with that object. Starting to make a little bit more sense? We'll go one deeper. Objects, stuff. Can we agree with that? Objects are stuff. Commandlets, things you can do with stuff. Modules, a list of things you can do to stuff. Properties, the details about that stuff. And methods are instructions for things that you can do to the stuff. Does that make sense? Does that help a little bit? This one took a little bit of time to actually be able to break down. It took me a little while to think of it this way, but this makes it a lot easier. Objects are just stuff. It's returning into a command window. Yeah, this is always the killer slide that people take pictures of. All of this is going to be downloadable for you after the fact as well, folks. So objects are just stuff. Now, the key thing to understand with that is as you load more and more stuff in, number one, it takes more time to load it in. It's not just a list. It's not just text-based. These are objects that you're actually returning. So now we can do things to those objects. One of the things that we can do with this is we can do a chain of object processing. So I can pull something in and then create a pipeline, which is that vertical, looks like a bar on your keyboard. Most people know what a pipeline is at this point. Kind of looks like two bars sometimes, but it's sort of like a colon that got flattened. Okay? But we can process, so you get your objects on one side of the pipeline, pass it through to the other side, and now we're able to process and do things to it, and the output becomes an input. So the first one becomes the input into the second one. You can chain these together. Don't get too crazy with it. Don't have 37 pipelines. It'll break stuff. All right? Now, one key with this, I told you about the shell and I told you about the ISE. The ISE is great for writing, okay? But you want to avoid running in the ISE if you can help it. Okay, it's baked in the operating system, but there's stuff that still doesn't quite work as well as taking and saving that commandlet that you just wrote or that piece of code and now going and running it in the shell. Even though it shows up in the bottom window, you're like, but it's right, I can hit the play button, I just want to do. When you want to actually execute on stuff, take it to the shell and run it there. How am I doing on time? I'm running out of time. Here we go. All right, functional explanation. So a couple of good functions for you to get started. As you're getting started with this, these are the ones that I recommend you examine first. Get command. This is going to give you a list of all of the commandlets that are installed on your machine. Okay? Get help displays information about that commandlet. Okay, so you're going to say get help, get command, and it's going to tell you what that will do. Okay? And it will actually give you some suggestions and examples as well. It's really helpful. And then get member, you can say get member of get help, and it will tell you all of the members of get help. Make sense? Easy way to remember this. I have a friend named Vlad Kontranescu. Anybody heard of Vlad? He's a PowerShell MVP. He's also an Office Apps and Services MVP. He writes stuff for Pluralsight and does all sorts of great PowerShell core content out there. I was talking with Vlad last year before I did this session somewhere else and said, hey, any tips? And he said, here's how I like to think, because we were thinking the same way. CHM. This is your, anybody remember the CHM files? The compiled help files, right? Hey, there's somebody in the back. Cool. Okay, Vlad's tip. This is a good way to get started. If you're trying to figure stuff out, this is always a good base to come back to. Even once you're an expert in PowerShell, these 3 commands can help you big time, okay? 3 more, get verb. What is this verb-noun stuff? Well, we do stuff to things with a hyphen in the middle, okay? So our verbs are our action words. Sorry, I have a 9 and 11-year-old, Max and Sam, they're awesome, but I had to go explain to them what verbs and nouns were, and I realized that I took it from my PowerShell session. Verbs are a list of the approved verbs, so you can think about what are the different ways and different things I can do, and as you're writing your own, you can deal with it however you like, but try and stick to the approved PowerShell verbs. The next one is my absolute favorite because, folks, I write PowerShell, generally it's about 2 in the morning. I've had a couple glasses of whiskey. I'm usually irritated by something I haven't been able to do during the day, and I don't always remember exactly what I did. So Start Transcript logs everything that I did in my PowerShell session. Okay? In my shell, I launched Start Transcript, and I have a PowerShell profile in my GitHub repo. If you go to github.com/Jason Himmelstein, you'll find it there. It sets it up automatically, so Start Transcript happens automatically. It logs it into a folder, so I can always go back and find what I did and see all of those different commands. It takes everything from the output in the shell and puts it into a log file. And the last one is get history. If you're in the shell at that time and you want to go back to something, get history is really great as well, and you can go and review it before you close that window. Start Transcript closes that transcript out when you close out that session. So, the do's, and I am running rapidly out of time. I have 4 minutes. Let's see how quick I can do this. Use variables. Variables. Everybody familiar with variables? Algebra. Anything can be a variable. Try and stay away from system variables. Go Google Bing for system variables. But use variables. But don't vary your variables. We'll talk about that in a minute. Do one thing at a time as you're getting started. Make sure you're running one process at a time. Eventually, you'll figure out how to chain these things together and make beautiful scripts. But as you're getting started, it's really important. As you're writing scripts, comment your scripts. This is code, okay? When I write on Thanksgiving at 2 in the morning after watching my team lose, because they usually end up losing on Thanksgiving, and I've got my whiskey and I'm hacking away at some PowerShell scripts, I use variables and I like to comment my code. I did have one called turkey at one point that was a variable. You can use anything. There was gravy, there was cranberries. Seriously, you can make anything. Make it intuitive though, highly recommend it. Create your scripts using the IDE, ISE, and then run it in the shell. Dispose of your objects, close your PowerShell window periodically, use that Start Transcript to help you save off those transcripts. Please test before using in production. Everybody has a test environment, right? If you don't, you only have a test environment, folks, okay? There's no such thing as a production environment without a test environment. And try to write reusable scripts. On the converse side, what things not to do, don't vary your variables. Okay, don't try and use the same thing with variables that are different, and don't try and use the same variable twice, because you'll overwrite that variable and it just isn't useful. Don't hard code things into your scripts. Never hard code a password or a username into your scripts. Bad. Just like anything else, don't do that. IP addresses, machine names, use variables. You can always, there are ways to enter those things in. Don't take code from the internet or a vendor and just run it in your environment. We covered that one already. That's bad. Don't assume that code isn't harmful, because it always is. And don't run code in the IDE and expect everything to work. The last couple of things, commenting, # is how you comment. I know it's in Twitter, it's different, but that's how you comment something out. That means it won't run. When you're trying to add mathematical things together, + is how you do it. Equal is equal or -EQ. Not equal is going to be that bang exclamation point. -any and -not. Very different things. Lastly, in the bracketology section, when I originally wrote this deck, it was March Madness, folks. So, curved braces or parentheses are used for required options or compulsory arguments or control structures. Curly braces give you the block expressions, and then square braces actually denote whether you're doing math or other elements. So when you're looking at help files, sometimes it's these optional elements, but otherwise it's usually done for math. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that helps you get started with PowerShell this week here at Microsoft Ignite. Hope you guys have an amazing week. Check me out on bifocal.show if you have an opportunity, if you're interested in Power BI, and I'll be around for questions after the fact. I got a D mic and I'll be over here. Thank you guys. Have a great day.